Okay, so welcome everybody to another It Factor. Today we have Alyssa Lee on. She works at AWS, and I always get your title wrong, so I'll ask you to keep it.
Totally fine.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, we're gonna start out and just have you tell us, a little bit about yourself and the work that you currently do.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thanks, Tara. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you and Sandra reaching out for this. My name's Alyssa Lee. I'm a customer success lead at Amazon or AWS. Specifically, I'm working on AI ML, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then services related to that and AI ops. So I just joined this particular team at Amazon back in April, but I've been in AWS for about 2.5 years. To give a little more history, prior to this, I spent about 2.5 years at Google. I was working on Android and different communication type services for them. And then before that, spent some time at Dell as a technical account manager. And yeah, and before that, I was at startups and and rewinding before that, I had a little stint at DreamWorks and then also was a student at UTD. So I was in your seat back then and met wonderful Tara and had a great time at UTD so back then. But yeah, so overall, I've had a collective of about 10 plus years of experience in tech specifically, all some sort of customer facing technical roles. As I've kind of increased throughout or gone through my career, kind of gotten increasingly more technical. AI and machine learning, it's definitely a very technical space. But yeah, so a little bit about my focus in my day-to-days. I'm a very much a customer engagement type of role. So what we have is we have a series of services in development for AI that are still like either in a beta stage or very early releases. So I'm putting them in front of customers to kind of get feedback on the service, understand their business use case, what we can do to help them bridge that gap, either to maximize their usage of the service or what changes we can make to the product to improve it. So I sit between the customer and then the product teams and engineering teams, and then I funnel that all back into AWS. And on the inside, I'm doing a lot of analysis of the feedback to decide, kind of help prioritize to be like, okay, we're seeing these certain asks more often, to kind of help shape the direction of our product roadmap and lean into that. So yeah, it's kind of my role is technically business development in a way where I'm sitting in the middle of all of that and kind of helping assess the direction of the business. So
Oh. So you answered a little bit of the second question I was going to ask, but what
yeah,
did you want to be when you grew up? Like when you're younger, like what did you think you would be doing?
yeah, yeah. For me growing up, I was kind of I was always interested in some sort of tech. I mean, my first journey was actually, I was really inspired by things like video games and movies and specifically, animated movies. So when I was growing up, I was always very much in tune of the newest type of technologies. Like I was always really fascinated with like the next cutting edge thing, whether it was like the newest phone that was out or the newest game console that was out, or I liked being on the edge of like what was brand new. So yeah, so when I was going to school, like picking colleges, I was looking for programs that kind of spoke to that technical world and also maybe that artist side of me too, of the animation. So like UTD, like that was actually a really good program for me where at the time, when I did the ATech, it was this combination of, animation learnings plus computer science. And it's kind of a good mesh of getting a little bit of everything I wanted to learn. But yeah, I mean, I think I've always wanted to be in some sort of either like the next best, like whatever cutting edge technology, which obviously AIML is very much in that space, And I've noticed that even throughout my journey in my career, it's always been like, like when cloud became a big thing, I moved into cloud, which is AWS. And when AI ML started getting to be big, I've been wanting to move into that. So who knows? I don't know what the next big thing will be, but maybe I'll just sit in AI and ML for a while. So yeah.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So you talked a little bit about like what exactly you do.
Yeah.
What kind of people do you think would be good for what you do?
Yeah. So I would say if I were to kind of profile someone, what I'm specifically doing, you kind of have to have two passions. One is like very customer obsessed, like you want to be in front of a customer helping them. And then the other piece is just like an interest in to learn. Because the one thing about like when you're in a space of really fast moving technologies, you have to learn constantly. Like to give you perspective, like I was helping with a certain product and helping develop that and learned it really fast in the summer. But here it is, November now, and I have to learn a whole new set of features and be an expert in those. So it's always ever changing. So you have to be someone that can learn technology pretty quick and you have a passion for it enough to like put it in front of a customer and be like, hey, yeah, this is why it is so great and how it can help you and kind of get a pulse on what they need to to help them. So you have to be empathetic and listen to the customer. Plus, you have to be pretty quick at learning technologies to be able to pitch it to them in a way that's actually like how it could help them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's quite the balance of things.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so you talked a little bit about like that communication piece is really important, and then also that like desire to learn. But what other skills would you say are going to be useful to have?
yeah. I always encourage. So there's a like we're very fortunate now the way the world is where there's so much information out there that's free, right? So it's actually very easy to kind of study and work towards areas you're interested in. So, like, for example, like if you want to get into cloud or get into something in that space, what you could do is you could look up different, like, I always recommend looking up certifications. And even if you just want to study the material, not necessarily take the test, but that's what I did for Amazon, where I was interested in working in cloud technologies. So I got their basic cloud practitioner certification back in 2018. And when I was studying for it, it was giving me all the foundational knowledge of kind of what the cloud was and what Amazon offered and what that looked like. Generally, that's a great place to start. I mean, even if you just want to study the material and not necessarily spend the money to take the test, like the just having that base knowledge, I think it's important to know that you have so much knowledge or like resources out there available to you that yeah, it's you can learn a lot without having to actually take any formal like certification courses or anything like that. So that's
Yeah.
worth sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. 'Cause I
Yeah.
think so many people are like, oh, well, I have to do this degree or that degree, and there's just so
Yeah.
much out there right now.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah,
free knowledge. Yep.
yes. So I always encourage like do your degree here at Colin because it's an awesome
Yes.
place. But keep learning stuff outside of what you're doing in class, right?
Yes.
So yeah. Um, so I want to go back a little bit and talk about like how did you get the job you're in? Like what did that look like for you in terms of like,
The steps.
how did you figure out those steps and like because you've worked at some really to me your career has been so freaking impressive. Like um how did that like talk about how you did that basically?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll rewind back to my early days, and this is one thing I always want to share with students because I think that if someone told me this when I was a student, I would have really appreciated it. Is that I think it's really important and it's actually really good to you shoot for the stars, right? You say what you want to do, but it's really okay to take some time to maybe start it somewhere a little smaller and kind of work your way up. So like, for example, work at like a startup or like a smaller firm or a consulting job before you get into the big dogs like the Googles and the Amazons. And it's mainly just because when you're in those smaller environments, you have a lot more room to fail. Like it's more okay to fail and you have a lot more chances to iterate versus when you start getting to the level that I'm at, like, they say you have room to fail, but the truth of it is like, it's very expensive if you fail, like it's expensive for the company. So even if you're going to be fine with your, like, they're not going to punish you or get rid of you, but it's expensive when you mess up at a level like where I am now compared to the startup level. So I think that it's okay to take your time. I want to highlight to everyone here that even though I'm sitting at AWS, I'm also 10 years into my career. So it was a very gradual growth. I spent like 3 years at a startup and then kind of worked my way up into bigger companies from there. And each step, I think that in terms of when I would take each step to keep growing, really, the answers will kind of reveal themselves for you. Like, I wouldn't say that if I were to look back at this and tell like my younger self, like, oh yeah, this is the path you're going to take, I would have been like, wow, there's no way I would have. But the biggest thing is that you can create a lot of opportunities for yourself just by purely I like this analogy my friends or somebody told me along the way of like, you want to put yourself out on the dance floor, like you're, no one's going to dance with you unless you're out on the dance floor. So you have to think about it that way, where as you're growing, it's good to like kind of plant the seeds of people to be like, hey, this is what I'm learning. So like, for example, if you want to work in like cloud technologies, it's good to put out to the world, like, or whoever's your circle is or your mentors, or, to say like, hey, I'm studying this right now. Like I'm doing an effort to get certified in this, or like, I'm really passionate about, and you put it out there. And naturally what happens is you start to get people just throwing you little bones to be like, oh, well, I heard wherever's hiring, or, oh, I also heard that, have you checked out this course? Because this stuff's great. Or like, oh, maybe you should talk to so-and-so because they work in this. And like, the more you put it out there, people just kind of start throwing out bones to you. It's like, you never know what that's going to lead to. So like, I'll give some examples is that when I was working at Dell, I remember I was like having this growing interest in cloud. And I just was kind of putting it out there, even just talking to my friends. It was just when I would go out with people. And then someone's like, oh, like Google's working on different things and let me put you in touch with so-and-so. And it was actually like through those connections that I eventually got referred into Google. So all you have to do is just kind of be open about what you're doing. And I think you're going to reveal little paths for yourself. And the biggest thing though, is when you see those, it's important to take advantage of it. Like if someone's like, hey, you should go read this course, like, especially if it's free, like take them up on it, because it might reveal something to you to be like, okay, yeah, like through this I met, like for me, what I like to do is I might like connect with that author on LinkedIn to be like, okay, that person wrote this training. I'm going to send them a message on LinkedIn and thank them. It's like all those little things kind of open up doors for you. So yeah, like I wouldn't really say that I had any magic in terms of like where I was like, oh yeah, this is how I got into Google and this is how I got into Amazon. It was like very gradual growth with along the way of, hey, this is what I want to do. So yeah, you kind of
Yeah.
manifest your journey that way. So
Yeah.
yes. Mhm.
And, somebody said the power of networking and being resourceful, but, where did that start for you? Like, did that start at UT Dallas? Like, where did you start that journey? Because I think as a
Yeah.
student and you have no experience and you're like, I know nobody but my faculty and my classmates, where do I go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to very early days. So one thing I think that's important to always be mindful of, because here's the one thing that I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that I felt was like, sometimes you'd want to apply to a job, they'd be like, well, you need experience. And it's like, well, how do I get the experience without ever having a job before? And like, that was a struggle before I ever got a real job. Because now I can just like, if I ever apply, it's like, well, obviously I have experience now. But back then, I think it's important to, so there's a couple of things that when it's very early, don't be shy just to start applying to all the places you're interested in. I think that's one thing that's important with the legway of, or the, what's the word? But use the merit you have to say like, well, actually, like, I do have an experience like as a student. Like you can actually really highlight that to be like, you know what, here's some projects I've been doing as a student that I actually feel like are going to mirror what I'm going to be doing in your job. And really, what's really powerful when you're just getting in is showing that confidence to be like, you know what, give me a shot. Like I can do this. I know my resume does not have what you're looking for yet, but this is why I think I can do that. And you can kind of sell yourself that way. I think that's important to remember. Your student experience is actually experience. So there's that. The other piece that's important is that don't be shy to take something that you don't think is quite the right fit, because part of that is because like a lot of when you first are starting your industry, they say the phrase like getting your foot in the door. That is actually a thing. It's like, be okay to take, like, for example, when I was working for the startups, like they just gave me a generic support job. And I was like, I don't know, like that's not the dream job. And like, what am I doing with my time? But really that was the stepping stone to my whole tech career. Like that little basic support job where I just answered phone calls and helped people. It's like, it's so important to like step into that. Yes. Like I love that. That's a good point, Nora, of the idea of an internship. So yeah. So if you have anywhere that's willing to, like, that you're interested in doing an internship with, like, that's another great way just to get your foot in the door. Really too, kind of building on what I was saying with networking before, when you do some sort of internship, like your most valuable experience, like you need, I told this actually to a set of interns that I was helping with, like in AWS, even in the summer, is like, those internships are really, as much as like, obviously they're hoping you'll build something that might contribute to the company while you're there as an intern, those experiences are for you. Like you're there to be like absorbing the culture of the workplace. You're there to like meet people. You're there to like, it's a great way to like focus on yourself and focus on your skill sets. Like internships are for you. And when you're there, like if you can just show, like, it sounds silly, but trust me, it's like if you're really passionate to be there and you're like, you know what, I love doing this and love growing, and you're showing that hunger, like you're going to be one of their top picks to bring back. Because that's kind of even what we saw. Like we had a batch of interns at AWS in the summer. And I looked at the ones that I know they're going to bring back. And I'm like, yeah, those were like the hungry ones that were just go-getters. So yeah.
So
Mhm.
it sounds like, it's creating connections with people, right? In
Mhm.
different ways. And then also just being open about what you're doing. And I think there's a hesitancy um, on a lot of our parts to, we don't want to brag about what we're doing or
Yeah.
sound arrogant, right? But I think it's the way that you do it. And I always admired that about you, that like you're just so humble. um, but you're just like, here's the things I'm doing. And it's not, how would you describe your ability to like do that and talk about those things without sounding like you're like, I know
Sure.
all the things, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Great question. And honestly, a lot of my humbleness comes from a lot of failures, to be honest. So, like, the one thing that's important is like, this is just the truth of it too. For every, I'm trying to think how many I could ballpark, but I've probably applied to like 30, 40 jobs that all rejected me, right? Like you have that like
Mm-hmm.
history in your life of just being like, all the people that didn't want me. And it like starts to humble you. Like, yeah, am I really good enough? Like, and some were really big companies or like really big things I really wanted. And they just like, no, you're not it. So like, and even persistency, like I want to give at least a little perspective before I answer your question is I applied to Google and Amazon, actually both of them, multiple times before I got in. So Google, I think I got rejected 3 or 4 times before they hired me. Amazon was only twice, but that was just because of the first time I applied was pre-Google days, and the second time I applied was after I had Google experience. So don't ever get discouraged by rejections like that, because even where I'm sitting, I got rejected from a few times. So, it's just part of the journey.
And I'm assuming you kind of spaced out those applications, right? You don't want to
Oh
just
yeah.
like keep hitting it over and
No,
over, right? Like it's not like a slot machine. Um,
no, for sure. Yeah, they're
Great.
like after like multiple years. Like Amazon was, I applied in whatever year, I want to say like 2017-ish, and then I applied again during COVID and got it during COVID.
Okay.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, by the time I applied again, I had Google experience, I had more Dell experience, I had a lot more things to back up.
Yeah.
Um,
So did you
yeah.
have a list? Did you make a list of companies that you wanted to work for? Like because I know you're really good at making like goals and whatnot. Were those?
I did it more based on, I would say so, but I think I did it more based on the technologies. So like, for example, Google and Amazon appealed to me because of the cloud piece, which is funny because when I was at Google, I was actually working on Android more than cloud, which was fine. That was actually fascinating to work on phones because I'll just say quickly, like Android is a fascinating product because you're literally like, I mean, everyone has a phone, and I'd be helping literally millions, hundreds of millions of people with everything that we would do. It's just crazy. That's an interesting way to think about impact. But yeah, so for me, I think I did it based on more an interest. I think companies respond to that well too, when they just know you're passionate about this space you'll be working in. But I think that's a great idea. I want to back you up, Tara, where it's like you make a list of companies you're interested in. Like that's a great way to, and understanding too that every company does things differently. Like everyone has their own culture, their own ways of processes. So like if you take the time to study those, and if you interview with that knowledge beforehand, they're a lot more interested to talk to you because they're like, oh, like this person already knows how it goes here. Or like, I mean, that's the one thing too, that's like, for example, there's an acronym, I think it's FANG, but it's like Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, but in Amazon. But the concept of it being like there's certain tiers of, and like groups, I should say, of companies that are like very similar in how they do things. So like, for example, me working at Google made it an easy hire for them into Amazon because the processes are so similar, or like similar mindsets, similar types of principles. But that's like one way that's helpful too, is learn about the culture, what matters to them, like what is a business, what do they focus on, and really speak to those. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Mhm.
Um,
See some
yeah,
questions.
I've got a question. So one person's asking, as a non-traditional student, like, you're switching careers, right?
Yeah.
You know, um,
Yeah, that's a good question from
yeah.
the one from Brian.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that question. I think that, so, I mean, depending on where you came from, honestly, there's certain things that are kind of universal as you cross into different industries. I guess it would just really depend too on what type of role you want to get into. I mean, I'm fortunate where like being in customer success, it's actually a very translatable job across industries. So I'd imagine so too, Brian, like you probably have experience in those other work experiences that's very translatable into what you want to do. I'd really recommend thinking about like what those are and being like, okay, like yeah, like this is why like I can take all this and bring it in to the IT field. One thing that we actually love too, especially even in like a very, like we have a very like we love seeing people that came from something completely different. Like I've been like, I'll give some examples. Like I remember we had like an old like police dispatcher one time join our org. We had someone from like, they used to do like, you know, something in construction or whatever. It's like they actually bring a whole new perspective that's really valuable because we like had never worked in it. So I think that's actually, it can make you like this unicorn, really, Brian, if you come in with some like extra knowledge that not everyone else is going to have. Just think about what that is and really double down on it.
It's great advice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'm trying to think of other questions. I had a couple, I think, that were just along those lines of like,
Yeah, I'm reading the
yeah.
comments too.
Mhm.
Let's see. Oh, I think I wanted to speak also to more to the you asked a question about humbleness and
Mhm.
presentation. I think one piece I really want to highlight, because I'm actually working on it now more for myself, because I've been doing a lot more speaking engagements, but it's really important. And this is harder to do when you're earlier in your career, I think, just because, I don't know, just it's hard for me now, even a decade in, but reminding yourself that you're there for a reason and you have that, like walk in with the confidence when you walk into a room, like be able to walk in and own a room. And I think that that's actually a really huge skill set that goes a really long way. And that could just be changes a little bit in like your tone and like how you address someone. And, like it's easier once you kind of break that ice with a customer too. But, like for example, me, like I interact these days with a lot of really high level, like C-level executives or some really big companies that bring, a lot of dollars to Amazon. So they're they can be intimidating when you think about it before you walk into that room. But it's important to kind of carry that presence and be like, yeah, I'm an expert in my space. Like I don't know everything, but ask me a question and I'm happy to help you out and I'll tell you what I know to the best of my ability. And if I don't know it, like I promise you I'll go grab someone that can actually answer that more deeply. So you walk in with this confidence and this presence that reassures, like whether it's a customer or like someone else in your company, to say like, you know what, I got this, and like earn that trust that even if she doesn't know it right now, she's going to know it like by the time we need to deliver this. So that's a skill set that, I'm working on even developing more these days. But it goes a long way. And it's not, I used to call it, fake it till you make it. But the truth of it is, it's like, if you're there, like honestly, even just the fact that you guys are already students, it's like you already have more knowledge in that space than, your customer ever did, just because you've been studying it. And like, you have to remember that and show that, and that confidence of like, yeah, I'm here for you. Like, no matter what, like whether I know the answer to that, I'm here to support you. Um, and that I think is something that not only is it important for, delivering like successfully to the customer, but also it earns like that carries you through your career, because people remember feelings. Like I always say that, like people can remember how they felt in a room. Like if they remember like, oh yeah, I really remember when I was with Tara, like for example, like Tara just made me feel so like supported and, like guided, and they remember those. They're not going to remember your specific words. They're not even going to remember the specific problem, but they're going to remember how they felt. So yeah, like I said, I'm still working on it for mine. Like I think I definitely have room to improve with like that presence. But yeah, that's my, and maybe, in terms of how to improve that, you could look into speaking trainings, things like that. I think that's like a good place to start for those type of studies, if you will. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's, it's until you do it and you practice it, like I would have never thought that I like to teach or get in front of people and speak, but
Yeah.
because I had a, because of experiences I had, and then I just kept doing it, and then it just kind of became something that you feel more confident at too, right? So that
Yes.
confidence, like you said, you kind of have to build that confidence as you go and say, I love that perspective of like, I have more experience already than the customer, because I think we forget that because we usually compare up
Yes.
a lot of times instead of comparing, down. We think about like all these other people that know way more than we do,
Right.
and then invalidate our own experiences, right? So
Yeah. That's
yeah,
how the phrase of that. So imposter syndrome, if you guys have heard of it, I mean, that's something that, yeah, I think no matter how far you get in your career, you always feel it. Like even me at Amazon, like there's definitely times where I'm like, oh man, I'm like the dumbest one in the room right now. And like, we feel that at times, even though it might not be true. It's just a feeling. But yeah, the truth of it is, and like I remember my manager even said it to me. Like I had a moment earlier in my time at Amazon where I was feeling that, and I was being really honest with him, and he just told me, he's like the fact that you're here is already a statement. He's like, you're doing great, you're doing fine. But sometimes like it's easy to have those weaker moments of being like, oh man, like maybe I'm not so smart, or I'm not so great. But we all have it. And it's
oh
just
yeah,
called imposter syndrome. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a thing. So
yeah. And yeah, once if you're in an interview, then you've already beat out like 200 and something other people
yeah,
to sit in that space. So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So to dig in a little bit more, like what parts of your job are the most interesting to you?
Yeah. What I really love, because I've always really loved the customer side of it. Um, I think it's really neat because every customer situation is its own unique, complicated little self. So you have like their own use case of why they're using your services, their own business problems they're trying to solve, their own solutions, even depending on what they have. So I really like the uniqueness of the different customers and building those relationships. And then also on top of that, I really enjoy just kind of seeing like what each of those are, right? To be like, oh yeah, like whatever they end up doing to resolve it. Yeah, like I've seen some really neat things that, are just like without naming any customers, I think I've seen solutions that of really innovative ways to, specifically even like I saw a really cool initiative one time of basically giving education to like those in prison that are incarcerated. Like they were using our technologies to build things to do something like that. And I'm like, that's so cool. Like I just sometimes you just see stories like that. And that's one of my favorite parts of the job. So that's really cool. I really enjoy too. I think when you start working for somewhere like Amazon or Google, even like, I mean, you could say this even for smaller ones, but when you start thinking about customer impact, I think that's really cool too. Like, I know for sure, like, at least here, sometimes I just get overwhelmed thinking about the number of customers that we're actually impacting. Like, yeah, there's literally like hundreds of millions of people that we're building for. It's kind of crazy to think about. But
Yeah,
yeah. But
that's
yeah, I think
awesome.
that, and then like just learning, like I said, like I love new technologies, learning new spaces. That's another favorite part of my job for
Yeah,
sure. So
cool. So you
yeah,
touched a little bit on like the interns that you like
yes.
saw. Um, can you give any more information on like, if I'm gonna go for an internship at AWS or really anywhere, but what's gonna make me stand out?
Yeah, no, great question. Um, yeah, so to give a little more context there, we had for the summer, we had a handful of interns in our org. So we all kind of took them under our wing and just had them either shadow our calls, and they also helped build, each of them had their own project. So they all had to do their own deliverable based on the space they were in. I would say that, so I'm not sure how they chose each of the interns. That would be interesting for me to know. But it was very clear that each of them had a really strong interest in their specific suit. So like, for example, we had like a marketing focused one. We had a more like partner type of business development one. We had, they're all pretty specialized. And even just being students, they had a really high passion for that space. So I think that when you're an intern, like you're not expected to show up in the sense of like when you apply and you're in that interview for them, they're not looking for like, oh, like we want to see all these things you've done and your experience. Like they want to hear your passion, like how into it are you and like what do you want to accomplish? And I think if you can come into it being like, hey, yeah, this is what I want to get out of the 3 months I'm here. So like, I think one thing you could do, and this actually applies to interviewing too, is like you could come in, remember that you're also interviewing them. Like, even though this is an internship and you're kind of feeling like, whoa, like what an honor, you're just as much interviewing like them. So like, for example, like I'm imagining you're interviewing for an Amazon internship. Like you could be like, hey, yeah, like what are you like, ask them like, if I'm doing this, what am I going to get out of this time in the 3 months? And then when they answer you like, okay, well, I would really like to get out of XYZ. Like, is that something that I'm going to see while I'm here? And like, you can actually show that to be like, I'm actually, I can give to you, but I want to know too what like this is going to offer to me. So I think that's a mindset that shows a lot of leadership. It's a mindset that says like, hey, yeah, I want to make sure that, what we're going to do is going to have the outcome I would like to see. And that's kind of the strength and leadership that principals I think that they might look for. Specifically Amazon, if you're interested, if you ever Google the leadership principles of AWS or Amazon, I should say, I think there's like 14 different ones now. But those are all ways that if you read it, I think it's a good way to understand the type of mindset you need to have when you come in. And honestly, like if you came in and started referencing a bunch of those leadership principles, they would be like, oh my gosh, this person, we need to bring them in. Like we live and breathe by these like,
yeah,
these like, I'll give examples. Like when we're in meetings, we like, they throw out these principles all the time. Like they'll be like, for example, like I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go take care of this customer problem. And someone will be like, great bias for action, Alyssa, which is one of the principles. Like, we speak in them. It's just really silly. It's really funny.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
Nora found the link to it already.
Yeah. That's the link. Yep.
So we can, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Customer obsession is a really
Customer
big one.
obsession.
Mhm.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's kind of it was the same way with at Disney because you've
Yeah.
recently been there. I used to work there, but there's like the 7 customer
Okay.
service guidelines for Disney, and like those are the things that you are trained and live by, right? So,
There you go.
you treat every guest in a certain way. You make sure that they have a great experience. It's just it's that customer focus. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you came in, you're like, I want to work for Amazon and like I can recite the 14 principles and I know them, like they'd be like, this person, they're so into it. But yeah. But yeah,
And
it's funny.
that's just a great point too, is like figuring out like you need to do your research and know like yeah what their mission statement is, what their vision
Yes.
is, like all of
Mhm.
those things are really important. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, yeah, the quickest way, if we're going to put it in the other light, the quickest way to be dismissed as an option, like if they're like, yeah, we're not going to go with this person, I think it would be like, if you couldn't answer questions about like, what is the mission statement? Like, what are the principles? Like, if you're just like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's like a big reason why they'd be like, yeah, maybe not this person, like, because they want to see people really passionate about the company or, you know, the role even of what they
yeah.
do. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Good. So on the flip side, what are some parts of your job that are like the least engaging?
Yeah. Oh man. So there's always something in every job. Well, I always say that to everybody. You're not going to find that job that has like no painful processes whatsoever. I think for me in Amazon, one that's a big one, and it's probably just as you get into these bigger companies, is everything take like the process of everything is so long. So like if you need to change something or submit something, it's like the wheels turn very slowly at Amazon, where you have to like build a very good use case of why you need to change something, and then it might go on for however long, like weeks maybe, to change something you need to change. So that's the problem if you need to ever change, like either like when I say things to change, it could be like a support process, it could be a certain like field you need to change or something. Like I think that's one of the most painful things. Because in the startup days, like I would just get into the code myself and I just like, I'm just gonna go change our website right now. And I'd be like, okay, cool. So that was startup days. But these days you have to get all these approvals. You gotta, you know, have a good use case of the change. Yeah, so I think that's one of the most painful pieces. I think another piece, let's see what else. Maybe, I mean, this isn't even Amazon's fault, but like these days, honestly, I kind of miss having face-to-face time in the terms of like in an office. And because right now we're in this really remote world, and it's not to any company's fault, but what's happened culturally is like customers and of course your team are so used to being remote that I haven't had that many in-person meetings in the last 2 years. So like, and for me, when it comes to customer building, like I love just having in-person time with them, even if it's like, hey, yeah, like meet me at this coffee shop, let's just have a coffee and talk about what you need to get done. Like those days, I think it's harder to align. It's not impossible, but I think that's one piece that's kind of a downside at the moment. But I can't really say that to like, I think that's just a big cultural world change that's happened in the last 2 years. So with that note, I think it is interesting to highlight though, like if this is like, say you're just getting into the working world, this isn't the way it used to be. Like we were in the office like 9 to 5, and when we're either in front of customers the whole time or with your team. So it's very different. So
Yeah. Do you think that's gonna change or be more hybrid or like?
yeah, good question. I see your one in the chat. You know, at Amazon, what they did was they left it up to each team. So the managers have decided whether or not we'd be remote or not. Most of the AWS ones decided remote just because we were able to do it. It's from home.
Mhm.
More of the retail ones, and like obviously the more like warehouse type jobs that everybody has to go in again. But for us, they're doing a more remote hybrid. I think that they will lean more into that. I do know that, we have probably like monthly meetings right now, and I could see us increase that. But I think the one thing that's interesting is even if we have hybrid, I noticed that when we set up events, so like we set up like, maybe it's with customer events or something, sometimes I noticed that the turnout's a lot lower compared to the way it used to be pre-COVID.
Mm.
So I think people are just getting so used to like not doing things in person that people are declining more in-person opportunities. So,
Yeah.
but I think it over time is going to change. I think people are going to get to a point where they just miss in person and they're going to want to do it more. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
know it's kind of it's an adjustment. So, we've been in person for a while, but I'm even
Yeah.
seeing more students in person than I used to. And it's your
Oh,
brain
good.
has to really adjust to that because, you spent what, a year or so where you're like, oh God, I can't talk to people or be in the vicinity with them without worried about like all these things. So I think it's just an adjustment too. So yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see. But it is kind of nice to be able to do things like this where I'm like, you're in Austin and we're in Dallas and we
Yeah.
can still have conversations and learn
That's
things.
true.
So
That is a
yeah.
pro. this
Definitely.
stuff. But yeah, I'd say that's another area that's a challenge at times, but yeah.
Yeah. So any other challenges that you would like to mention related to your job?
Let's see. For me personally, at least right now, I'm assigned to some newer products in development. So this is an interesting insight that I think that it's kind of goes, a lot of companies do this, by the way. So Amazon has a bunch of microservices. Like we literally have thousands of services. And we're always the belief of it being like each one kind of has their own little function. So like, S3 is storage, you have, EC2, you have different specific little services for specific purposes. But what I was going to say is that when you're on newer services, reality is however many you have on you, like there's probably gonna be one or two that fails. So I think that's kind of a challenge because sometimes when you're on a product and you feel like you've invested all this stuff into a certain service and they're like, yeah, no, we're actually going to deprecate that. Like it kind of feels a little bit like, oh man, my baby is like, my project is going away now. So I've already been through that. I went through that at Google once. Like I had, and keep in mind, it's always like a handful of projects, but we had one that got sunsetted and I was like, oh man, like I kind of missed that project now. And I already know like there's kind of the writing on the wall for a certain services I work on now that I'm like, yeah, I think at one point they'll probably say bye to it and I'm just going to be like, oh no, like bye project. Project I worked on. So obviously the goal is you'd love to see everything you work on just like thrive and be like, oh yeah, like that's one of the next big services here and it's making millions of dollars now. But the truth of it is that's kind of how it is. I mean, it's the same thing if you get into like gaming or whatever, like there's a lot of games that are actually a loss versus a profit. But then there's always those weird little glimmering ones that make up like all their money for a particular company. So it's kind of that's that way for here or at Amazon for sure. Like most of the services that at Amazon, like if you know what they are and you've heard of them, they're kicking butt. Like obviously like Prime or whatever, like there's certain like programs that are just like, yeah, those are really well if you've heard of them, but
Right.
smaller ones you haven't yet. Yeah. So I think that's a big challenge. Like I think I've already been through that a few times of being like having to say bye to projects, and not that it's a big deal, like from a business perspective makes sense, but from like a little like personal connection, you're like, oh, I'm gonna miss that project. So yeah, but yeah, that happens and I've already been through it a couple of times. So yeah.
So for any of our students who are interested in more of the like the project management side of things, like
Yeah.
how did you work into that space? Are there certain things that you use or need to know about? Like, tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
If you're interested in getting to like PM type work, it's important to learn about like frameworks. So like one framework that comes to mind is ITIL. So that's like the process of development. But like if you Google just some different PM cycles, like you can kind of learn about that life cycle of when an idea comes along to how you develop the product and how you pitch it and how you like deliver and then iterate, see if it's successful. Learning that cycle is huge. I think that's a good place to start if you're interested in getting to project management. I think with that too is like, if you ever, like it's the equivalent of shadowing, but like if you're ever assigned to a project as one piece of that, it's good if you're interested in that, you can kind of speak with the PM to understand like, hey, yeah, like can you kind of give me some sense of how you're taking this end to end? Like for example, when I worked on Android, I was always in touch with the project manager of that, even though I was just assigned to certain features. So I'd kind of understand that life cycle of like, all right, so how do we know what features to work on? And like, how do we decide if they're successful or not? Like, it's good to know like those metrics and the process and journey of that. But yeah, I mean, going back to that idea of like free resources, trying to think what you'd Google for that. But if you just put something like product life cycle or something like that, I'm sure would kind of give you the stages and kind of understand what you need to do in each. So
Yeah. Right.
there you go. That's a good, the 5 phases of project management. Yeah, and then with that, I guess, like you just posted in the chat, Nora, that's great. So it's good to know too, like, if you understand each of those stages is kind of understanding that transition stage is like what makes it going from an initiation to planning, what makes it going from planning to execution, like understanding those transitions, I think is a big part of it too. So
what do you want to learn next?
yeah, well, my most recent thing I just learned was security. So I just did I did a certification, I should say, in security. So I actually want to learn more about like that specifically. So specifically like application security, data security. Yeah, because the AI ML piece or services I'm working on, we're developing some more like AppSec type related features. I think that would
Okay.
be really cool to be like just understand it more because
Yeah.
it's just fascinating. So yeah, security is my next
Okay.
like
Well, we can help you out with that over here. So
yeah. I was gonna say, I know talking to a group of people studying that. So
yeah, you're talking to some cybersecurity folks on here, so
awesome.
we can definitely help you out with that. We've got a few more minutes
It's
left.
funny that I even forgot that I mentioned that because that wasn't even prompted, you guys. Like that's a genuine curiosity.
Yeah, Mia's like, yeah, security is where it's at.
Yeah, it really is. It's such a valuable space. Like
Mhm.
I think that's worth saying, like of all the different disciplines, I think cybersecurity, like security in general, it's such an important area. And there's so much room to improve it too. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
think you guys are getting into a really good space.
yeah. So if you're interested, one of the classes that we have here is cyber psychology.
Oh, cool.
Because security, what people, processes, and technology, and most failures are because of people, right? So
Oh, I
um,
love that.
yeah, so if you want, they offer it online too, I think. So cyber
Oh,
psychology.
cool. Yeah, you should send me information.
Okay, I will. I'll recruit you.
There you go. It's a
Uh,
win-win.
yes. So, okay, I always like, so you talked a little bit about lessons learned. Any other lessons learned that you'd want to share with students?
Uh, let's see. So really big, simple one that I think is just worth reiterating that you probably all know. Never be afraid to ask for help. Or if you ever feel like, I don't know what to do next, like use your resources. You have Tara here, you got different folks here. It's like one thing that I think is really important with that, it's not even so much getting the answer to your question. If you're like, hey, I have this question, I need help, I need guidance. But what that conversation actually is really valuable for is it's a huge motivation booster. Like for me, if I have a conversation about my career, I'm actually really inspired after that conversation to go do those things. I think that that's actually more the value of than actually getting the answer to your guidance questions. Because when you have someone be like, hey, yeah, go do that, like, having a career coach is great, but like it's that conversation that's really going to be like, yeah. So ask for help, reach out to people, let let things in, like let any opportunities that come from that. Like you might have some really random, like we call it water cooler talk at work, where it's like some of our most brilliant little like collaborations came from just like you just randomly were talking in the coffee room. And then it's like, oh yeah, like you're just talking about things and something brilliant comes out of it. So
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
that's great. Yeah, go have conversations with people
Yeah.
and ask them about their careers. Like, I mean, you've given me some ideas too, where I'm like, ooh, now I feel motivated to do these things, right?
Yeah.
So one last question we have from a student is certifications. Like it's always a big question. What are some that you think would be beneficial when working with AWS?
So I'm going to put in a link here. AWS actually has a whole bunch of specialty ones.
Okay.
The first one I would recommend that I think is a great starter one, and it's also really cheap. I want to say it's only 70, it's like $150 to take it.
Okay.
If you get discounts somewhere, maybe you can apply it. But the cloud practitioner one is the best one to start with because it's a real good, it's an overview of all of the everything that's going on, and it's kind of like a real high level of all that. And the one thing that we've all, like when you start taking them, you'll notice is once you do like that plus a specialty exam, like you start seeing a lot of the similar overlapping content. So you can kind of hone in from your specialty from there. For you guys here, I would say that honestly, like the security one would be good. I think that's a good, like the one thing to keep in mind with the AWS certifications is they're very AWS specific. So they're going to talk about what we offer and like what the application of that certain ideas to our services. But obviously, like, if you're interested in other companies, I'm sure they have something similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would recommend that. I mean, it's not necessary to get a job here, but I think that it at least helps with you having that knowledge coming in. So yeah.
And we actually are part of like the students in our program, we reimburse them for certifications that
Oh,
they
good.
pass. So yeah, even if like $150, yeah, you pass it, we got you covered.
Awesome. There you go.
So yeah, keep that in mind, y'all.
Yeah.
So I think one last question that I always like to ask is, if you weren't doing this career, what else would you be doing? So if this didn't work out for you, what would be your alternative career?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer it as if I didn't have to worry about money.
Right.
I'm really passionate about, yeah, like I did this volunteering. I did some marine biology stuff for sea turtles. Honestly, like that was just fun. I literally just hung out on a beach and just would rope off turtles and answer questions about sea turtles people. But yeah, we did like nest watches, things like that. And sometimes we travel to different little islands in Hawaii to kind of help them out. But yeah, probably something in marine biology just because I love those. But yeah, I think tech's a more stable career. I don't
A
want
little bit.
any of you to abandon your cybersecurity journey to go save sea turtles, but maybe do it on the side. But
Yeah. That
you
could
do
be like
this.
retirement, right? Like
Yeah,
devote your whole entire retirement to sea turtles.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. I
Okay.
will actually when I
Okay.
retire, I'll go help sea turtles.
Awesome. All right. So we've run out of time. I really, really appreciate you taking time to be
Yeah,
here and to talk about your experience and offer such great advice.
yeah, it's
And
so
then,
nice to meet
yeah.
you.
And then just for students, we've got a survey for you to take. So Nora's going to put that in the chat. And then if you don't fill it out now, she's going to bother you a lot. So please take a moment to fill that out. And yeah, Alyssa, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great to see you.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you so much.
so yeah, just stay warm this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. I dropped in my LinkedIn too, and I want to
Awesome.
offer, just because I know what it feels like being in your guys' shoes. Feel free to reach out if you guys want to do a call or something. Just let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that so much. So,
Yeah. Thanks,
all
Tara.
right.
It's so good to see you.
Yeah, so good to see you too. We'll have to do like a
Not,
non-businessy catch up
yeah,
for sure.
for sure.
For sure. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. Appreciate it and have a great weekend.
All right.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.